So today we want to talk about rider position. I went back through photos to find the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the first thing I want to do is send a big thank you to my riders for letting me use them as an example. I don't want to pick on any of these riders, and I think they are all excellent riders. Everyone has good and bad moments in their equitation, and I went and picked some out to use as examples so that everyone else can learn from them. So the first thing we want to do is look at vertical alignment, and that's where in a upright sitting position, our ear, shoulder, hip, and heel come into alignment to make a vertical line. The next thing we want to check is our horizontal alignment. If you look at a rider from behind, everyone is a little bit crooked. This can be worse if the horse is crooked. Because I know this horse and rider, I know that this horse overbends to the left and pushes out the right shoulder. This has pushed the saddle off to the right and has also pushed the rider off to the right. You can see that there is more of her body on the right side of the vertical line, and you can see that her stirrups are uneven from being pushed off to the right. It is important to always get our bodies and our horses' bodies as even as possible. Just like every horse, every person has a different conformation. To the best of our ability, we need to find that vertical alignment through the ear, shoulder, hip, and heel. Once we have good vertical balance, then we can start to develop an independent seat and focus on having a straight line from the elbow to the bit and an even connection in the reins. This rider is doing a good job following the horse's head and neck down and maintaining a straight line from her elbow to the bit. There are lots of things that can go wrong in rider position. In this photo, the rider is tipping forward. You can see the vertical line from the ear, the hip, and the heel do not line up. They are three separate lines. This means the rider is sitting too much on her crotch. Next, we have the chair seat. This is where the rider puts her feet out in front of her and is sitting too far in the back of the saddle. The foot in the stirrup cannot support the rider's center of gravity, and she is sitting too far back on her butt. A lot of things can help or hinder a rider position, one of them being the saddle. In jumping saddles, the stirrup bar is put far forward on the saddle to aid in jumping. The blue line in this photo shows where the stirrup bar is located and how the stirrup leather hangs down from the stirrup bar. When sitting in a vertical position on a jumping saddle, it is almost impossible to get the heel under the hip. You can see that with the foot out of the stirrup, the heel will naturally hang straight down underneath the rider's center of gravity. The trick is to maintain this vertical line even when putting the foot in the stirrup. Here the rider has placed her foot in the stirrup and is sitting vertically in the saddle. The green line indicates where the stirrup bar is and where a vertical stirrup leather would be. To maintain the heel under the hip, she has had to pull the stirrup leather back at an angle. When she begins to ride forward, the stirrup leather will become vertical once again, and her hip angle will close to keep her in balance. There are similar challenges with a Western saddle. They are also made for the rider to sit in the back of the saddle. The stirrup bars are placed too far forward, creating a chair seat. The horse's conformation and saddle fit also affect the rider's position dramatically. This horse is built high in the front and low in the back, putting the rider in a back seat position. Although the rider is almost in vertical balance, you can see that the heel is a little too far forward in front of the hip. Having the saddle adjusted would help the rider have a better position. Size of the horse also affects the rider's position. This rider is in good vertical balance, but she has to sit far forward in the saddle to maintain her center of gravity over the pony's center of gravity. Switching disciplines is also challenging. After riding hunt seat her entire life, she switched to dressage in her 40s. Getting used to longer stirrups and opening up those angles is a challenge. Here in the trot, lengthening the rider is reverting back to a more hunt seat position. Fortunately, it is balanced and the horse is not hindered. Here the rider is starting to find a more vertical position. In order to test your vertical balance, try to stay up in your post. You should be able to balance as if you are standing on the ground. Always make sure you have soft elbows so they can open and your hand can follow the horse's mouth, always maintaining that straight line from the elbow to the bit. When you have good vertical balance, you can maintain it at any gait. We use our hip, knees, and ankles as shock absorbers and use those angles to help us balance over the horse's center of gravity. A proficient rider can balance over the horse, staying out of the horse's way, allowing the horse to perform. To keep the rider's center of gravity over her feet, the hip and the knee angles should match. The angles can open and close depending on what is needed. Here the rider has slightly opened her angles for a bit of a downhill. This helps the horse stay balanced and not get on the forehand. Practicing hand galloping in this position is excellent for developing balance and strength. It's important to hold the mane to help support the body until the rider becomes proficient. Now let's get back to hand position. At first glance, this picture may not look that bad. However, the rider's hands have dropped too low. When we draw some lines, we can see that there is not a straight line from the elbow to the bit. You can also see that the horse is a bit braced in the mouth. Another common mistake is riding with reins too long and then riding in your lap. This rider needs to bend her elbows and lift her hands. When there is steady contact with a straight line from the elbow to the bit, the horse can come into the contact and use his body. Now let's talk about rider position over jumps. This rider is in good balance with her horse. Her angles match, and she is doing a good job of a crest release. This vertical line represents her center of gravity, and you can see that half of her weight is on the left side and half of her weight is on the right side. Here we have a rider whose angles are more open and she could be reaching forward and giving the horse a little better, but her angles still match. They may not match perfectly, but when we draw lines, we can see parallel lines from her upper body and her lower leg. Here we have a rider who has a much more closed hip angle than knee angle. She has managed to find some balance over this jump, but you can see that it doesn't look as balanced as the other riders. It has caused her hips to go back almost past the back of the saddle and has caused a little hump in her back. We can see that this is a habit with this rider with a very open knee angle here and a very closed hip angle, causing her to duck over this jump. This puts the majority of the weight over the horse's head and neck just when it needs to take off. Here is this rider once again finding a much more balanced position with the hip and the knee angles matching. You can see that her crotch is hovering right over the middle of the saddle, completely in balance. And if we were to draw a line through the stirrup bar and the stirrup leather, we would find that half of her body would be on the left side of the line and half would be on the right. The horse opens and closes the angles depending on the stage of the jump. Here the rider's angles are quite open. We'd actually like to see the knee angle a little more closed so she isn't jumping over the front of the saddle so much. She is jumping ahead slightly in this photo with her knee angle open more than her hip angle. Closing the hip angle would bring her crotch closer to the center of the saddle. What we will see, however, is that the horse will start to close her angles over the apex of the jump. Although the rider got a bit ahead of her horse at the takeoff of the jump, over the apex she is in good balance. The horse has closed her angles and her angles are closer to matching. She is also doing a really good job with a crest release and staying with the horse's mouth. This rider is also jumping ahead and leaning too much on the horse's neck. Her crotch is actually over the front of the saddle and the leg has slipped back. The result is she has lost her balance on landing, but luckily she was holding the horse's mane. You can see that she has hit the saddle before the horse has landed all the way. This rider has arched her back, which has also thrown her leg back and pushed her upper body too far up the horse's neck, another form of jumping ahead. Here this horse has launched at this jump from a long spot, which has thrown the rider's leg back and turned her toes out, taking her knees off the saddle. Here's another example of a horse making an extravagant jump, but this rider's angles have helped her stay with the horse. She is still in perfect balance. This rider's upper body looks great, and she's doing a great job with the crest release holding mane to stay out of the horse's mouth. However, she has wedged her foot into the stirrup, which has made her ankle stiff. You can see how this has stiffened the whole lower leg and not allowed the knee to be flexible. Here's the same rider with a little bit better stirrup position. She just needs to continue to work on her knee and ankle flexibility. This rider's angles are very open because she needs to shorten her stirrups, but she's still an athletic rider staying in balance with her horse. Here's the same rider, obviously in balance with her horse, but still with very open angles. The problem with having our angles too open in jumping is that we often can fall back and hit the back of the saddle before the horse lands the jump. This rider would benefit from keeping her hip angle closed longer. This rider has also opened her hip angle up and hit the back of the saddle on landing. She's doing a good job of following the horse's mouth and not pulling on him even though her body is falling backwards. If this rider closed her angles a bit more, it would bring her crotch over the center of the saddle and prevent her from jumping ahead. Although this rider is doing a good job planning for the next jump, she has leaned too much, and you can see how it throws her body out of balance. She needs to use her eyes without ducking her shoulders. I hope this video was helpful. It's all easier said than done. We all have ugly moments in riding. It's always helpful to look at pictures and videos of yourself riding. The more we work on our equitation, the more effective riders we will be.